Marcus Thompson clutched his worn guitar case tighter as another pedestrian walked past without dropping a coin. The rain had started again, and his cardboard sign was getting soggy. 3 days without a real meal, 2 months behind on rent, and his landlord's final notice burning a hole in his pocket. But then he saw the kid, 17, maybe 18, huddled in the alley across the street, shivering in clothes that had seen better weeks. Marcus had no idea that in the next 10 minutes he'd make a decision that would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes the person who looks like they have nothing is actually worth more than you could ever imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The subway platform at 14th Street was Marcus Thompson's stage, though calling it that felt generous on nights like this. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an unforgiving glow on the handful of commuters who hurried past without making eye contact. Marcus adjusted the capo on his acoustic guitar, a 1994 Martin D28 that had been his companion for over a decade. Back when his biggest worry was which record label might sign him. That was before the industry changed, before streaming killed album sales, before his savings ran out, and his girlfriend Emma left him for someone with a steady paycheck and health insurance. Now at 32, Marcus found himself playing for subway coins and hoping to scrape together enough for another night in his studio apartment in Queens. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd grown up in suburban Connecticut, the son of an accountant and a high school principal. Piano lessons at 6, guitar at 12, Berklee College of Music by 18. His parents had mortgaged their house to pay his tuition, believing in his dream even when he'd started having doubts. They'd died in a car accident 3 years ago, never getting to see their investment pay off, leaving Marcus with nothing but medical debt and the crushing weight of unfulfilled expectations. Tonight felt different. Though worse, the usual spots had been claimed by other buskers, and the transit police had been cracking down on permits. Marcus had managed to find this corner of the platform, technically legal, but hardly prime real estate. The foot traffic was light, and those who did pass seemed more focused on avoiding the growing puddle near the leaky ceiling than appreciating acoustic renditions of classic rock songs. He'd been playing for 2 hours and had exactly $4.37 to show for it. Not enough for the $15 minimum his corner bodega required for credit card purchases, not enough for a decent meal, certainly not enough to make a dent in the rent he owed. His fingers were getting stiff from the cold that seeped through the tunnel, and his voice was starting to crack from overuse. Marcus finished a particularly soulful version of Blackbird and looked up to see a businessman in an expensive coat drop a quarter into his guitar case without breaking stride. The man was already on his phone before the coin hit the velvet lining. Marcus wanted to call after him, to explain that this wasn't just some hobby or side hustle, that this guitar case represented the difference between having a roof over his head and sleeping on park benches. But pride kept him quiet, the same pride that had prevented him from calling his cousin in Denver, who'd offered him a job at an insurance company. The platform was emptying as the evening rush wound down. Soon the late-night crowd would emerge, a different demographic, one even less likely to appreciate indie folk covers. Marcus considered packing up early, maybe hitting the 24-hour diner on Roosevelt Avenue where he could nurse a cup of coffee for an hour and use their Wi-Fi to apply for more day jobs he probably wouldn't get. That's when he saw the kid. The boy was maybe 17, 18 at most, sitting against the far wall near the emergency exit. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, a faded hoodie that might have once been blue, jeans with holes that weren't fashionable, sneakers held together with duct tape. His dark hair was long and unkempt, falling across his face as he stared down at his hands. Everything about him screamed long-term homelessness, the kind that comes from months or years on the street rather than a few bad nights. Marcus had seen plenty of homeless people in his time busking around the city. Most were adults, many dealing with addiction or mental health issues that made interaction complicated. But this kid was different. He sat quietly, not bothering anyone, not asking for handouts. There was something almost dignified about his stillness, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible in a world that had already decided he didn't belong. The boy's eyes met Marcus's across the platform, and Marcus saw something that made his chest tighten. It wasn't desperation or anger or the hollow look of someone who'd given up. It was recognition. The kid was looking at Marcus's guitar case, at the small pile of coins and crumpled bills, with the understanding of someone who knew exactly what it meant to have your entire livelihood reduced to whatever strangers might spare. Marcus finished the song he'd been playing and set his guitar aside. The platform was nearly empty now, just him, the kid, and an elderly woman reading a paperback novel while she waited for the F train. Without really thinking about it, Marcus walked across the platform. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. "You doing okay?" The boy looked up, startled. Up close, Marcus could see he was probably closer to 16 than 18, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed older than they should be. There was a faint bruise along his jawline, mostly healed but still visible. "I'm fine," the boy said quietly. His voice carried a slight accent Marcus couldn't quite place, maybe Southern or Midwestern. "Just waiting for the train." It was an obvious lie, but Marcus didn't call him on it. Instead, he sat down against the wall a few feet away, close enough to talk but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. "I'm Marcus," he said. The boy hesitated. "Danny, you play any instruments, Danny?" Something flickered in Danny's eyes. "Used to." "Not anymore? What did you play?" "Guitar, mostly. Piano, a little." Danny's hands moved unconsciously, fingers pressing against his thighs like he was working invisible frets. "My mom taught me when I was little." Marcus felt that familiar tug, the same one that had made him choose music over stability, art over security. "She still around?" Danny's face closed off. "No." The weight in that single word told Marcus everything he needed to know. This wasn't a runaway rebelling against suburban parents. This was a kid who'd lost everything and was trying to survive alone in a city that ate people alive. "Listen," Marcus said, standing up. "I know you probably don't want charity, but I'm packing up here anyway." "You hungry?" Danny shook his head, but Marcus heard his stomach growl from 6 feet away. "There's a place a few blocks from here. They make decent sandwiches, and the coffee's not terrible. My treat." For a moment, Danny looked like he might accept. Then he shook his head again. "I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. Everyone asks eventually." The bitterness in Danny's voice hit Marcus harder than he expected. How many people had offered this kid help with strings attached? How many times had kindness turned into exploitation? Marcus walked back to his guitar case and started packing up. As he wrapped the cable around his small amp, an idea began forming. It was crazy, probably stupid, definitely not something a financially responsible person would do. But Marcus had stopped being financially responsible the day he decided to chase his dreams instead of his parents' safer vision for his life. He looked at his guitar, the Martin D28 that had been with him through every open mic night, every failed audition, every late-night writing session. It was worth more than his car, more than everything else he owned combined. It was also the one thing standing between him and complete failure as a musician. But looking at Danny, Marcus realized something that surprised him. Maybe there were things more important than holding on to symbols of dreams that might never come true. Marcus closed his guitar case with a soft click that echoed through the nearly empty platform. The sound seemed to wake Danny from whatever reverie he'd fallen into, and the boy's eyes tracked Marcus's movements as he shouldered his amp and picked up the case. "You know what?" Marcus said, stopping halfway to the stairs. "Forget the sandwich." He turned around and walked back to where Danny sat, setting his guitar case down with deliberate care. Danny watched with growing confusion as Marcus popped the latches and opened the case, revealing the Martin D28 nestled in its worn velvet interior. "What are you doing?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus lifted the guitar out, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. The wood was smooth from years of playing, worn in all the right places. He'd named her Melody back in college, though he'd never told anyone that. She'd been his confidant through breakups and breakthroughs, his companion through the loneliest nights and the most hopeful mornings. "You said you used to play," Marcus said, extending the guitar toward Danny. Danny recoiled, as if Marcus was offering him a live snake. "I can't take that. That's your instrument, and now it's yours." "No," Danny scrambled to his feet, backing against the wall. "No way. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not playing it." Marcus understood the reaction. In Danny's world, generosity came with a price tag, and expensive gifts meant expensive favors expected in return. But Marcus wasn't playing a game, wasn't running some elaborate con. He was operating on pure instinct, the same instinct that had made him choose art over accounting, love over logic, dreams over security. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "It's not a game," Marcus said quietly. "Look, I've been playing this thing for 15 years. I've poured my heart into it, my soul, every hope I ever had about making it in music. And you know what? I'm 32 years old, sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment I can't afford, playing for subway change. Maybe it's time I admitted that some dreams aren't meant to come true. That doesn't mean you should give away your guitar, doesn't it?" Marcus sat down on the bench, cradling the guitar in his lap. "My parents died believing I was going to make it. They mortgaged their house to send me to music school. I've spent 14 years trying to honor that sacrifice, and all I have to show for it is debt and a rapidly approaching eviction notice." He strummed a chord, letting it ring out through the tunnel. The sound was pure and clear, exactly the kind of tone that had made him fall in love with this instrument in the first place. "But you," Marcus continued, looking up at Danny, "you've got something I lost a long time ago. You've got nothing left to lose. When you've got nothing left to lose, that's when the real magic happens. That's when you stop playing it safe and start playing from the heart." Danny shook his head. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're young. I know you're alone. I know you understand what it's like to have the world tell you that you don't matter. And I know that when you looked at my guitar case, you weren't seeing dollar signs or thinking about what you could get for it. You were remembering what it felt like to make music. The truth of that statement hung in the air between them." Danny's hands had moved again, fingers unconsciously forming chord shapes against his thighs. "My mom taught me House of the Rising Sun when I was 8, Danny said suddenly. "She said music was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you, no matter how bad things got. She was right. She was wrong." Danny's voice turned bitter. "They took everything. The house, her job, her health. And when she died, they took me away from the only place I'd ever felt safe. Foster care, group homes, families who looked at me like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. Music didn't save any of that." Marcus felt something break inside his chest. He'd thought his story was tragic. Dead parents, failed dreams, financial ruin. But Danny's pain was different, deeper. It was the pain of a child who'd been failed by every system designed to protect him. "How long have you been on the street?" Marcus asked. 6 months. "Since I aged out of the last placement?" Danny's matter-of-fact delivery made it even more heartbreaking. "Turns out 18 is the magic number where everyone stops pretending to care." 18? "I thought you were younger." "I know. People always think that. It's useful sometimes. Makes them less likely to see me as a threat. More likely to buy the story that I'm waiting for someone to pick me up." Marcus looked at this young man, because that's what Danny was, despite his boyish appearance, and saw himself at 18. Not the circumstances, but the core of it. The desperate need to be understood, to matter, to have someone believe in the possibility of a future that looked different from the present. "What was the last song you played?" Marcus asked. Danny was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he wasn't going to answer. Then so softly Marcus almost missed it. "Wonderwall, Mom's favorite." I played it at her funeral, on this beat-up acoustic the funeral director let me borrow. Broke 2 strings halfway through, but I kept playing anyway. Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He stood up, still holding Martin, and walked over to Danny. She was right, you know, about music being something they can't take away. They can take your home, your family, your security, but they can't take the melody that lives inside you. They can't take the way your fingers remember chord progressions, or the way your heart still responds to a perfect harmony. He held out the guitar again. This time Danny didn't back away. "I can't afford this," Danny whispered. "It's not for sale. It's a gift. No strings attached, no favors expected, no conditions. Just one musician to another, passing along something that might do more good in your hands than it's doing in mine." Danny's fingers were trembling as he reached out and touched the guitar's neck. The moment his skin made contact with the wood, something shifted in his posture. His shoulders straightened slightly, and for the first time since Marcus had approached him, Danny looked directly into his eyes. "I don't understand why you're doing this." "Neither do I," Marcus admitted. "But sometimes the best decisions are the ones that don't make sense on paper. Sometimes you have to trust your gut over your head." Slowly, carefully, Danny took the guitar. He held it awkwardly at first, like he'd forgotten how instruments were supposed to feel in his hands. Then muscle memory kicked in, and he settled it against his body with the natural grace of someone who'd been playing since childhood. His first chord was tentative, barely audible. His second was stronger. By the third, his fingers had found their confidence, and the sound that emerged was pure and haunting and absolutely perfect. Marcus had just given away the most valuable thing he owned to a stranger, and somehow it felt like the smartest thing he'd ever done. Danny's fingers moved across the frets with increasing confidence, finding chord progressions that Marcus hadn't heard in years. The music that emerged wasn't polished or perfect, but it carried a raw emotional weight that made Marcus's chest tighten. This wasn't just someone playing guitar. This was someone reconnecting with a part of themselves they'd thought was lost forever. The last train of the evening rumbled into the station, its brakes screeching against the rails. The handful of late commuters who emerged paid no attention to the young man with the guitar or the older musician watching him with something approaching wonder. In their world of deadlines and obligations, they missed the small miracle happening in the corner of their commute. "I should probably find somewhere to sleep," Danny said after the train departed, but he made no move to hand back the guitar. His fingers continued to pick out a melody Marcus didn't recognize, something original, something that seemed to be writing itself in real time. "Where do you usually go?" Marcus asked. Danny shrugged. "Depends. There's a 24-hour McDonald's in Midtown that doesn't kick you out if you buy something small and sit in the back. Sometimes the public library, but they're closed now. Subway tunnels stay warm, but transit cops do sweeps after midnight." The casual way Danny listed his sleeping options hit Marcus harder than any sob story could have. This was just Danny's reality, a rotating cast of temporary refuges, none of them truly safe, all of them requiring constant vigilance. "I've got a couch," Marcus said before he could stop himself, Danny's hands stilled on the strings. "I can't." "You can. It's not much studio apartment in Astoria, but the couch pulls out and it's warm." "No strings attached," Marcus added quickly, seeing the wariness creep back into Danny's eyes. "Just a place to sleep and maybe a shower in the morning." For a long moment, Danny stared at the guitar in his hands. When he looked up, his expression was guarded but hopeful. "Why are you being so nice to me? You don't know me." "I could be dangerous or crazy, or you could be," Marcus agreed. "But you're not. And even if you were, I've made worse decisions with better odds." Danny almost smiled at that. Almost. The train ride to Astoria was quiet. Danny sat with the guitar case balanced carefully on his knees, like he was afraid it might disappear if he didn't maintain physical contact. Marcus found himself studying the kid's reflection in the dark window, looking for clues about who he'd been before the streets had worn him down to bare survival. There were hints if you knew what to look for. Danny's posture, even exhausted and guarded, had an underlying straightness that suggested good breeding. His speech, when he forgot to be defensive, carried traces of education that went beyond public school basics. And his hands, Marcus had noticed this earlier, were softer than they should be for someone who'd been homeless for 6 months. Not soft like someone who'd never worked, but soft like someone whose work had been mental rather than physical. Marcus's apartment was exactly what he'd advertised. Small, sparse, and dominated by musical equipment that cost more than most people's cars. A keyboard took up most of the living room, surrounded by amps, mixing boards, and coils of cable. The walls were covered with lyrics sheets and chord progressions scrawled on napkins and scraps of paper. "This is incredible," Danny said, setting down the guitar case and looking around with genuine awe. "You wrote all this?" "Most of it. Some of it's covers I was working on, trying to figure out what made them tick." Marcus cleared a pile of sheet music off the fold-out couch. "Bathroom's there, kitchen's basically that corner with the mini-fridge. Help yourself to whatever you can find." Danny nodded but didn't move toward the food. Instead, he continued studying the walls, his eyes tracking across lyrics and musical notations with the focus of someone reading a foreign language. He was slowly remembering how to speak. "This line," Danny said, pointing to a sheet near the window. "The road to nowhere still leads somewhere, if you're brave enough to walk it blind. Did you write that?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Yeah, it's not very good. I was going through a particularly pretentious phase." "It's beautiful." The simple sincerity in Danny's voice caught Marcus off guard. He'd shown those lyrics to Emma once, back when they were still together. She'd rolled her eyes and called them emo college boy nonsense. But Danny was reading them like they were scripture, like they meant something important. "You can take a shower if you want," Marcus said, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of Danny's attention. "There are clean towels in the closet." Danny nodded and headed toward the bathroom, but paused at the doorway. "Marcus, thank you. For the guitar, for this, for—" He gestured vaguely, unable to find words for whatever he was feeling. "Don't mention it." After Danny disappeared into the bathroom, Marcus found himself looking at his own apartment through a stranger's eyes. It was shabby, cramped, and probably violated several building codes. But it was also filled with music, with creativity, with the detritus of someone who'd refused to give up on art, even when art had seemingly given up on him. The shower ran for nearly 20 minutes. When Danny emerged, his hair clean and his skin flushed from the hot water, he looked even younger than before. Without the grime of the streets and the defensive hunch of his shoulders, he could have passed for a college freshman. "I left my clothes on the bathroom floor," Danny said. "They're pretty gross." "I might have something that fits." Marcus rummaged through his dresser and pulled out an old Berkeley t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. "These should work." As Danny changed, Marcus made coffee and tried not to think about how drastically his life had just changed. 6 hours ago, his biggest problem had been making rent. Now he was harboring a homeless teenager whose story had more holes than a screen door. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it felt right in a way Marcus couldn't explain. "Can I ask you something?" Danny said, emerging from the bedroom in Marcus's borrowed clothes. The shirt hung loose on his thin frame, but the transformation was remarkable. Clean and properly clothed, Danny looked like what he probably was. A smart, articulate young man who'd simply run out of options. "Shoot. Why music? I mean, you're obviously talented, but you said yourself it's not working out financially. What keeps you going?" Marcus considered the question while he poured 2 cups of coffee. It was something he'd asked himself countless times, usually at 3 a.m. when the bills were piling up and the rejections were mounting. "You know that feeling when you hear a song that's so perfect it makes your chest hurt," Marcus said finally. "Like the artist reached inside your soul and pulled out something you didn't even know was there." Danny nodded. "I've been chasing that feeling my whole life. Sometimes as a listener, sometimes trying to create it for other people. It's like trying to bottle lightning. Most of the time you fail spectacularly, but every once in a while You catch just a spark of it. And that spark is worth all the failure. Danny was quiet for a long moment, cradling his coffee cup like it was precious. My mom used to say music was math that made you cry, he said finally. I never understood what she meant until tonight, watching you play in the subway. The equations were all there, rhythm, harmony, melody, but somehow they added up to something bigger than numbers. Marcus stared at Danny, struck by the sophistication of the observation. This wasn't the way most 18-year-olds talked about music, especially not 18-year-olds who'd been living on the streets. Where did you go to school? Marcus asked. Something shuttered behind Danny's eyes. Different places. I moved around a lot. It was clearly a deflection, but Marcus didn't push. Everyone had secrets, and Danny had already trusted him with more than he probably should have. Well, Marcus said, settling onto the couch beside Danny, whatever schools you went to, they taught you to think. That's rarer than you might think, Danny managed a small smile. Maybe, or maybe I just had a really good teacher. He picked up the Martin again, his fingers finding the strings like they'd been separated from an old friend for far too long. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful, complex enough to showcase real skill, but simple enough to break your heart. Marcus closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something that resembled peace. Marcus woke to the sound of his own songs being played better than he'd ever played them. For a disorienting moment, he thought he was dreaming, but the morning light streaming through his apartment window was too real, too harsh. He sat up on his bed and listened to Danny working through one of his more complex compositions, adding flourishes and variations that Marcus had never considered. The clock on his nightstand read 6:47 a.m. Danny must have been up for hours. Marcus found him sitting cross-legged on the floor. The Martin balanced perfectly as he played. Danny's hair caught the morning sun, and for the first time, Marcus noticed something he'd missed the night before. A small scar along Danny's left temple, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. Morning, Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle him. Danny's hands stilled on the strings. Sorry, did I wake you? I tried to keep it quiet. No, it's fine. That was really beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that? Danny shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Just picked it up over the years, I guess. It was another deflection, but Marcus was beginning to understand that Danny's reluctance to discuss his past wasn't just shyness. It was self-preservation. In Danny's world, information was currency, and currency could be stolen. I made coffee, Danny said, nodding toward the kitchen counter. I hope that's okay. Marcus poured himself a cup and nearly dropped it when he tasted it. It was perfect. Not too strong, not too weak, with just enough cream to smooth the edges. It was coffee, made by someone who understood that brewing was an art form, not just a caffeine delivery system. Where did you learn to make coffee like this? Marcus asked. Danny froze, realizing he'd made another small mistake in his careful construction of ordinariness. I'd worked at a cafe for a while before. Before what? Before everything went wrong. Marcus sensed he was approaching dangerous territory, so he changed the subject. I've got to head out in a bit, pick up some sheet music from a guy in Brooklyn. You're welcome to stay here, or if you'd rather, I should probably go, Danny said quickly. You've already done too much, have I? Because, from where I'm sitting, I gave away a guitar I wasn't using to its full potential and gained the best houseguest I've ever had. You cleaned the kitchen, made perfect coffee, and somehow made my own songs sound better than I ever have. Danny ducked his head, but Marcus caught the small smile before it disappeared. Look, Marcus continued, I know you don't trust easily. I get it, but you don't have to leave unless you want to. The couch is yours as long as you need it. What if I need it for a long time? The question was asked so quietly Marcus almost missed it. When he looked at Danny, he saw something raw and vulnerable in the young man's eyes, the look of someone who'd been disappointed so many times that hope had become a luxury he couldn't afford. Then you need it for a long time, Marcus said simply. Danny's composure cracked just for a second, but it was enough. Marcus saw the 18-year-old beneath the careful defenses, the kid who'd been forced to grow up too fast and carry too much weight alone. "I have to tell you something," Danny said suddenly. "About who I am. About why I was really on the street." Marcus set down his coffee cup and waited. "My name isn't Danny Morrison," he began, then stopped. "I mean, it is, but it's Daniel Morrison Blake. My mother was Sarah Morrison before she married my father. The way Danny said, 'my father,' carried enough venom to kill small animals. Richard Blake, you might have heard of him, Blake Industries. Blake Foundation, Blake this and Blake that. He owns half of Chicago and has his fingers in businesses from here to California." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Blake Industries was massive: construction, real estate, manufacturing. The kind of empire that made its owner one of the wealthiest people in America. "My mom worked as his personal assistant," Danny continued, his fingers absently picking out a minor key progression on the guitar. "They had an affair. I was the result. He paid her to disappear, set her up with a house in Michigan and enough money to raise me quietly. The deal was that I'd never contact him, never try to claim his name, never interfere with his legitimate family." Marcus tried to process what he was hearing. The homeless teenager he'd befriended was the secret son of one of America's most powerful men. "Mom kept her end of the bargain," Danny went on. "We lived simply. She homeschooled me, taught me piano and guitar, made sure I understood literature and history and mathematics. She said education was the one inheritance no one could take away from me. We had a good life, quiet but good. What happened? Danny's playing became more aggressive, the minor chords taking on a harsh edge. Mom got sick when I was 15. Lung cancer, even though she never smoked a day in her life. The medical bills ate through our savings in 6 months. When that was gone, she tried to contact my father, asked for help with treatment costs." Marcus felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. He had his lawyer send a cease and desist order, reminded her that she'd signed a non-disclosure agreement, that any attempt to contact him or his family would result in legal action. Mom was too proud to fight and too sick to work. We lost the house. She died in a county hospital charity ward while he was probably deciding which of his vacation homes to visit for the weekend. The bitterness in Danny's voice was so sharp it could have cut glass. "After the funeral, I went into foster care, bounced between families who didn't want a grieving teenager with trust issues. The caseworker tried to locate my father, but his lawyers buried the inquiry in paperwork. Officially, I didn't exist. I was just another kid in the system, with a dead mother and no known relatives." Danny stopped playing and looked directly at Marcus. "I ran away from the last placement 6 months ago. Been on the streets ever since, trying to figure out what comes next." Marcus was quiet for a long time, absorbing the magnitude of what Danny had just shared. This wasn't just a story about a homeless kid. This was about systemic abandonment, about power protecting itself at the expense of innocence. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked finally. "Because you gave me something I thought was gone forever," Danny said. "Not just the guitar, though that means more to me than you'll ever know. You gave me back music, and with it a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. You did that without knowing who I was or what I might be worth to you. That kind of kindness, it deserves honesty." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Danny's educated speech, his sophisticated understanding of music and literature, his ability to make perfect coffee and clean an apartment like he'd been raised with standards. This wasn't a street kid who'd fallen through the cracks. This was a young man who'd been systematically erased from the life he should have had. "There's more," Danny said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My mother wasn't just my father's assistant. She was also the daughter of his business partner, William Morrison. Morrison died 5 years ago and left everything to his only heir, his grandson, me." The guitar slipped in Danny's hands as the full implication hit Marcus. "I'm not just the secret son of Richard Blake," Danny continued. "I'm the legal inheritor of Morrison Holdings, which includes about 40% of Blake Industries. I'm worth somewhere north of $300 million. and I've been eating out of dumpsters because I didn't know how to claim an inheritance without exposing myself to a man who's already proven he'd rather see me dead than acknowledge I exist. Marcus stared at Daniel Morrison Blake, and realized that giving away his guitar had been the least significant decision either of them would make this week. The silence that followed Danny's revelation stretched between them like a chasm. Marcus found himself staring at this young man who just casually mentioned being worth more money than most small countries' GDP, while sitting on a fold-out couch in a studio apartment that smelled faintly of instant ramen and broken dreams. $300 million, Marcus repeated slowly, as if saying it out loud might make it make sense, give or take, Danny said with a bitter laugh. Hard to get exact figures when you're not supposed to exist. Marcus set down his coffee cup with hands that weren't entirely steady. Daniel, why haven't you claimed it? I mean, if it's legally yours, because claiming it means going public, Danny interrupted. It means lawsuits, media attention, and Richard Blake trying to destroy me before I can touch a penny. My grandfather's will is ironclad. I inherit everything on my 21st birthday, no conditions. But Blake Industries is structured so that my grandfather's shares give me controlling interest in my father's company. Richard Blake would rather burn it all down than hand control to the bastard son he spent 18 years pretending doesn't exist. Marcus walked to his window, looking out at the morning traffic crawling through Queens. So you've been hiding. Surviving, Danny corrected. There's a difference. I've been trying to figure out how to claim what's mine without getting myself killed in the process. Killed? You really think your father would? I think Richard Blake is a man who's built an empire on controlling narratives and eliminating problems. I'm the biggest problem he's ever faced. Danny's fingers returned to the guitar, but this time the music was softer, sadder. Some nights on the street, I wondered if dying of exposure might be easier than fighting him. The casual way Danny mentioned dying made Marcus's chest tighten. But you didn't. No, I kept thinking about what my mom said about music being math that makes you cry. I figured if I was going to die, I should at least try to solve the equation first. Marcus turned back to Danny, studying his face. And now? Now I'm not so sure I want to die anymore. Danny looked up from the guitar. Funny how a little kindness can change your whole perspective. They sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Marcus spoke. I know a lawyer, he said. Well, I know someone who knows a lawyer. My college roommate works for a firm that handles estate cases. Big ones, Danny shook his head. I can't afford legal fees. I've got exactly $47 to my name. What if money wasn't the issue? It's always the issue. Not always. Marcus pulled out his phone. What if I told you that David Chen owes me a favor that's worth more than $47? Danny looked skeptical. What kind of favor? Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. The kind where I caught him cheating on his finance exam senior year and didn't report it. He's been trying to pay me back for over a decade. You'd use that for me? Danny, you gave me something last night that I'd lost without even realizing it. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Watching you play my songs, seeing them come alive in your hands. It was like hearing them for the first time. Marcus pulled up David's contact information. Besides, this isn't charity. This is justice. Your grandfather left you that money because he wanted you to have it. Some corporate shark in an expensive suit doesn't get to override a dying man's wishes just because it's inconvenient. Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was smaller than Marcus had ever heard it. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if Blake's lawyers are too powerful, or the case drags on for years, or then we'll figure something else out? But Danny, you can't live in hiding forever. Sooner or later, you have to decide whether you're going to let fear make your choices for you. Marcus hit David's number before he could second-guess himself. The call went to voicemail. David, it's Marcus Thompson. Remember that conversation we had about payback? I'm calling in that favor. I've got a friend who needs the best estate lawyer you know, and money's not an object, because if this works out, my friend will be able to afford whoever you recommend. Call me back as soon as you get this." He hung up and looked at Danny. "There, it's done." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Danny set the guitar aside and stood up, walking to the window Marcus had just vacated. "You know what the weirdest part is? I've spent so much time thinking about money as this abstract thing. Numbers on paper, shares in companies I've never seen. But sitting here playing your guitar, drinking coffee in your apartment, this feels more real than any of that ever did." "Money's just a tool," Marcus said. "What matters is what you build with it. What would you do if you were me?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I'd probably start by setting up a foundation in your mother's name. Music education for kids who can't afford lessons. Maybe buy some instruments for schools that have had their arts programs cut. Use the Blake name to do something Richard Blake would hate. Make the world a little more beautiful instead of just more profitable." Danny turned from the window with tears in his eyes. She would have loved that. Marcus's phone buzzed. David Chen's name appeared on the screen. "That was fast," Marcus said, answering. "David?" "Marcus, I was just thinking about you yesterday. How are you? Still playing music?" "Still trying." "Listen, about that favor, name it. You saved my career before it started." "What do you need?" Marcus looked at Danny, who nodded. "I need you to connect me with the best estate and inheritance lawyer in New York. Someone who's not afraid of taking on powerful corporate interests. And David, this is bigger than anything you've handled before." 3 hours later, they sat in the Manhattan offices of Rebecca Walsh, Esquire. Walsh was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the room, simultaneously. She'd spent the morning reviewing documents Danny had stored in a safety deposit box, birth certificates, medical records, his mother's correspondence with Richard Blake, and most importantly, William Morrison's will. "This is extraordinary," Walsh said finally, looking up from the papers. "Mr. Blake, you have an airtight claim to one of the largest inheritances in recent history. The question isn't whether you'll win, it's whether you're prepared for what winning looks like." "What do you mean?" Danny asked. "I mean that the moment we file these papers, your life changes forever. Richard Blake will throw every resource he has at discrediting you. The media will dissect your past, your mother's past, every choice either of you ever made. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Danny looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "Ms. Walsh," Danny said, "I've spent 6 months sleeping in subway tunnels and eating food out of dumpsters. I think I can handle some bad press." Walsh smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. "Mr. Blake, I think we're going to get along just fine." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, watching Danny perform with the New York Philharmonic. The Morrison Foundation for Musical Education had commissioned a piece from Marcus, his first major composition, inspired by a chance encounter on a subway platform. Danny had won his inheritance, of course. Walsh had been as good as her word, and Richard Blake's lawyers had found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The case had settled out of court for an undisclosed sum that left Danny in control of Morrison Holdings and a significant shareholder in Blake Industries. But more importantly, Danny had found something worth more than money, a purpose that honored his mother's memory and his grandfather's legacy. Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Danny approaching. "Still in his concert tuxedo. How does it feel?" Marcus asked. "Like solving the equation," Danny said with a smile. "Like math that makes you cry, but in the best possible way." They stood together, listening to the thunderous applause from the audience, an audience that included music students from underfunded schools across the city. "All guests of the Morrison Foundation, you know," Danny said. "I never did thank you properly. For what? For seeing something in me that I'd forgotten was there. For reminding me that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that don't make sense on paper." Marcus laughed. "I think we both learned that lesson as they walked out of Carnegie Hall together, Danny carrying the same Martin guitar that had started everything. Marcus realized that sometimes the most valuable things in life were the ones you gave away freely. He'd traded his most prized possession for something far more precious, the knowledge that music really was math that made you cry, and that the most beautiful equations were the ones solved by human kindness. The city lights reflected off the guitar case as they disappeared into the New York night. Two musicians who'd found their way home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.